The Asotin County Fair rolls into town at the end of April every year, drawing hundreds of folks to the quiet and typically calm town of Asotin. But this is also a time of year that brings back a specific memory, the memory of a mystery, of a girl who seemingly vanished into thin air.
At that time, just things like that didn't happen around here.
Detective Jackie Nichols with the Asotin County Sheriff's Office has spent years now trying to piece together that mystery that unfolded on April 28, 1979, right here on the streets of Asotin.
That was the day that Christina White, she was 12 years old, went missing, and she's never been found.
Now, 38 years later, Detective Nichols refuses to let Christina's memory fade.
I have her picture up there just to kind of always remind me, because it is a cold case. It's easy to kind of let those cases get pushed aside, and I just don't want them to be forgotten.
In the morning hours of April 28th, Christina White went to watch the parade that celebrated the arrival of the Asotin County Fair. Soon after, she went to help a friend.
She had planned to go with her friend to help with the horse up at the fairgrounds.
But Christina said she wasn't feeling well, having suffered heat stroke in the past, and it was hot that day, so she went back to her friend's house.
So she had called her mom and said, that she wasn't feeling well, and asked her mom to come get her.
Christina was at this house. Her mom said she couldn't pick her up and told her to walk 5 blocks to this corner, where her mom would be watching for her from 2 blocks away up here near her home. But Christina never made it to that corner. She disappeared.
For reference, here's a map of Christina's walk, sometime between when she hung up the phone and the minutes it would take for her to get to that street corner. She vanished. There are no answers, but there are clues, and those clues point to a possible connection with murders across the river in Lewiston.
They realized perhaps this person was responsible not only for the 3 people in Lewiston, but also Christina White's disappearance.
It was Christina White's mother that told us the suspect's name.
The Lewiston Civic Theater, a stoic, historic graystone, now lays condemned, decrepit, and at risk of falling apart. This description plays all too well into the reality of a case that's gone cold.
1982, in Lewiston, 2 girls and a man went missing on the same night.
The girls, Christina Nelson and Jacqueline, who went by Brandy Miller, were stepsisters attending Lewis Clark State College. Both worked at the Civic Theater on shows. On September 12, 1982, they decided to walk to the grocery store and were never heard from again.
Their route to the store would have taken them right past the Lewiston Civic Theater on that night. Law enforcement suspects that they went inside. They were never seen alive again.
But there's another person who vanished, who was also working at the theater and was there that night.
The man that disappeared, Stephen Pearsall, his girlfriend dropped him off at the theater that night, watched him go inside. A passing patrol officer saw him go inside, so we know he went inside the theater, and then he was never seen again.
As the theory stands, Stephen Pearsall was a bystander that was pulled into a situation he would never return from.
It's often speculated that the young man walked into the theater and saw something he shouldn't have seen, and that's why he's gone.
A year and a half after that night, a teen walking the highway found a heart-wrenching scene. The bodies of Christina Nelson and Brandy Miller.
They were found outside of Kendrick, Idaho, off the side of the highway as it goes up the grade there. It was as though they'd probably been tossed over the side of the grade and rolled down and stopped at the base of a tree.
Gloria Boberts knows all too well the impact that night has made.
I knew she wasn't coming back. I knew it. I could feel it.
Gloria is Christina Nelson's cousin. She's never given up on catching her killer.
They don't have a voice anymore. They can't fight, and you just can't give up.
But there's another person who is also part of this story, a person with a much different, darker involvement than anyone we've discussed so far.
There is a suspect.
This man admits to working in the theater the night all 3 people vanished.
Police officers realized the man that was working in the theater that night lived at the home where Christina White disappeared from.
Christina White, Brandy Miller, Christina Nelson, and Stephen Pearsall, all suspected to have fallen victim at the hands of another. Law enforcement made a critical discovery shortly after the murders of Miller and Nelson.
The man that was working in the theater that night lived at the home where Christina White disappeared from.
But there's also another woman, killed 1 year before the murders of Christina Nelson and Brandy Miller. This one, harder to link than Christina White.
It was quite a bit different than the girls from the theater area.
The murder of Kristen David. She was riding her bike from Moscow to Lewiston. Somewhere between the two locations, she vanished. A few days later, on the 4th of July, 1981, her body was recovered from the Snake River.
Just the condition of the remains in that case, there's a lot of things about it that are very different. So I wouldn't say for sure it's connected, but I also wouldn't rule it out.
But many people speculate that the killer is the same person, and Detective Jackie Nichols is keeping all possibilities open.
If they are linked, I would think it was because the reason they're so different is the person is trying to purposely make them so different.
The way Kristen David's body was disposed of was very different than Christina Nelson and Brandy Miller's bodies, but there are still a lot of unanswered questions.
And of course, we don't know what happened to Christina White, so that's always sort of the unknown in there.
The suspect can't be named because he has never been charged with the crime, but Nichols says he admits to being in the Civic Theater the night Stephen Pearsall disappeared and when the women were murdered. He also lived at the house where Christina White was last seen. Gloria Boberts, Christina Nelson's cousin, has spent years now looking into this suspect.
He always seems to be in where people have disappeared. He admits to being at the Lewiston Civic Theater.
After the murders in 1982, law enforcement began to look into this man's possible involvement.
Well, he initially gave a couple of interviews to law enforcement and then no longer wished to cooperate with law enforcement.
Detective Nichols says he then moved to the other side of the country, and even though he's thousands of miles away from Asotin County, she thinks about him every day.
I mean, I would definitely like to interview him. And I have since the day I started the case.
Many people ask, why hasn't he been charged?
You have to be able to prove everything, and in a case this cold, it becomes even more difficult because witnesses have left, passed away, forgotten.
But she's not discouraged, and she continues to follow leads.
And now I'm kind of at the point where I'm trying to collaborate with the Lewiston Police Department, and we've been working on going through the files and cleaning them up and looking at what we have.
In the case of Christina White, Detective Nichols says when she has leads, she follows up. But one of the challenges of finding her is where we live.
It's very daunting without having a specific direction to look for a missing person. Our landscape is extremely vast and can be rugged, and there's certain areas that aren't accessible by vehicle. People can literally disappear out there and not ever be found.
Do you still feel like there's hope to solving these cases?
Yeah, it can happen. It can definitely happen. I mean, it could be tomorrow, it could be 20 years from now, but it could happen. And so as long as there's that possibility, I'll keep working on it.
And Detective Nichols' outlook gives the families hope.
She seems to think that this case is solvable, and I believe her. All I know right now is I'm going to keep pushing, and I will push and push and push and push and push.